Okay. Yes. I hope you enjoyed the lunch. Now I understand that it can be a bit challenging to refocus after a meal, but I assure that we are about to engage in a compelling discussion on public administration reform. So, as we journey toward EU integration, meeting EU requirements and achieving satisfactory governance reforms are pivotal. This panel is convergence of international donor organizations and civic servants and public organizations. And I'm happy and delighted to invite Ms. Anna Gvenetadze, who will be moderating this panel, emphasizing the crucial support of USAID on this important topic. And let me introduce Anna. Anna is a governing institution lead at the USAID National Governance Program. And thanks for co-sponsoring and supporting today's and tomorrow's event. Anna has a very strong expertise, both from civil society and civil service. She was the head of the administration dealing exactly on public administration, with public administration reform, and not only, and also working on anti-corruption topics from civil society, and now joined the USAID team on national governance. So, floor is yours. Please introduce your brilliant panelists, and I look forward to listening to you.
Thank you very much. Just give me 1 second, so I'll just grab a seat here. It's a bit difficult to focus after the lunch. I know it's the last panel of the day, but hopefully we will manage to get you interested in what we wanted to discuss with you. So let me introduce you my panel. So it's Mr. Alistair Swarbrick. He's representing OECD Sigma with us today. Please. Mrs. Maria Stogova, who is from EU delegation, and she's the team leader and the attaché for the governance and human rights team. Mr. Jabir Devdariani, who I think is joining us from Vienna. He's a UNDP advisor on policy planning. And we also have our international guest visiting today. So it's Adrian Elmurachi, who is the head of one of the biggest think tanks in Moldova, which is the Institute for European Policies and Reforms. And my last but not least panelist, which is Milos Djindjic. He's the program manager at the research organization focusing on the European policy. Thank you. Right, so I think... Hi, Jabba. Hello. We can all see you. Hi. Great. So, now, as Georgi mentioned, today's panel is dedicated to the public administration reform and its role in the process of the EU integration, especially for the countries who have just obtained candidacy from the EU and for those who have moved at the next stage, which is opening the discussions for the EU accession. Before I move to the discussion part actually and let my panelists share their opinions, I just wanted to briefly tell you about the program that I represent today, which is the USAID's National Governance Program. It's a relatively new program compared to the other ones, so it's in second year of our launch. We focus actually to support the government of Georgia in making sure that we support them in delivering effective, transparent, and citizen-responsive reforms. We also work to strengthen the oversight function of the parliament along with other oversight institutions. And of course, we work to empower civil society organizations, and this includes private sector, academia, as well as media representatives, to make sure that the citizen demand side from the bottom up actually is present, and we actually succeed in holding government accountable and making them work for the needs of the citizens. Now, one of the biggest focus of the program, obviously, is to support the government of Georgia in delivering the public administration reform. I lead the component, actually, that works with the... I have, as Georgi said previously, worked with the government in the public sector. I was a civil servant for a long time, and I was lucky enough to be actually at the administration of the government when the first principles of public administration was developed and launched. Back then, we managed to initiate few important reforms that was later translated to the government policies, and I'd like to think that it has improved overall governance. But right now, the government of Georgia is implementing second phase of power reforms, which definitely have several achievements that deserve to be acknowledged, but at the same time, there are many gaps and challenges that definitely needs to be addressed as soon as possible, especially now that we have been given candidacy, and completing and following through the recommendations that EU Commission has outlined for us is crucially important, and we'll decide actually whether we will move to the next stage or not, which is hopefully opening the accession talks. That was all actually from my side, so I won't take any more of the time. I actually would like to go to my colleagues. I think my first question will be with Alistair, who is representing Sigma. I've known Alistair for over 10 years now. He's been there to support the government of Georgia initially from the very beginning when we worked on the first draft of the framework for the public administration reform. Alistair is the senior policy advisor at the Sigma. He's also country manager for Georgia, and he has very good overview and experience in Eastern European countries, Eastern Partnership countries. And actually right now, actually he's supporting us to improve the public finance management reform and concentrate on the public internal financial control systems. I guess my first question would be for you to sort of really tell us why the public administration reform is really so important in this process of EU integration. And many times when sort of we review the different assessment reports, there are some areas of the PAR that are more highlighted in these reports. For example, PFM often gets mentioned, anti-corruption often gets mentioned. So I guess my question would be that how do you think, what are the most crucial components of the PAR? And if you think that they have, some of them have bigger role to play in the integration compared to the other ones.
Okay. Thank you very much, Anna, and it's a pleasure to be with you here today. Thanks for those questions. So in terms of why do I see public administration reform as important from an EU context and EU integration context, well, I'd look at it from two perspectives. First of all, public administration reform, or PAR as I'm going to now call it for the rest of this, is one of the fundamentals that the Commission have set out that all countries on the negotiation path, on the candidacy path, need to have in place. It's one of the major areas of fundamentals. It's not part of the formal acquis communautaire, but to move forward in the negotiations, you have to address public administration reform. And why? Why do the Commission think that in the European Union? It's because they see having appropriate and administrative and institutional capacities being essential to be able to effectively implement the acquis and to actually meet your obligations of the European, being a member of the European Union. So it's seen as a fundamental aspect of requirement. And if you don't address it, you don't make progress, it will impact on impede your ability to move forward on the negotiations. But I think secondly, the Commission and the OECD for that matter see public administration reform as a fundamental element of good governance, or effective public administration is a fundamental element of good governance, and is a fundamental element that drives effective economic growth, innovation, better quality of life for citizens, etc. So if we look at specifically how does public administration impact on that, it's through improving the efficiency and effectiveness of the public administration, through looking at reforms that look at the organization and structure of government, which can lead to improved service delivery, more efficient and effective service delivery, providing better services for citizens. It's through increasing transparency and accountability in the use of in government services, in government administration, which helps to build trust between government, citizens, and society, helping to build a more democratic society. It's also about helping governments to adapt to the changed needs, societal needs, technological achievements, other challenges, so that there can be innovation in governance practices through effective public administration reform. It's also about looking at how you can become more cost savings, become more economical in how you manage your administration through identifying effective cost savings, which through process re-engineering, other ways to identify savings, and then which can be reinvested in investment in public services, for example. Also, it's about building the capacity and the institutions to be able to deliver as well for citizens. And finally, it's about also helping, from my perspective, to increase citizen participation, effective public administration reform. That through greater engagement, through greater empowerment of communities, it can lead to more responsive and inclusive governance, which better reflects the diverse needs of the society that we live in and the preferences of the population. So there's from two perspectives of that. There's the requirement of the fundamentals for the negotiation process, but then there's the broader reasons of why it helps drive economic growth, innovation, investment as such. And from an external perspective, effective public administrations this demonstrate stability in the government and encourage foreign inward investment and support to further embed the growth and make it more sustainable. So those are the two reasons for why I see it as being fundamentally important, and why the European Commission, Union see it as fundamentally important, and the OECD for that matter. Then in terms of what's important, what's the most important? Well, I'm a British chartered accountant, an auditor, and a certified fraud examiner. So you might think, I would think PFM and anti-corruption might be the most important aspects of it. And if you catch me at a weak moment, I'll probably say yes to that. But if I'm being honest, you know, it's the whole system, all the elements of public administration reform are important from my perspective. You know, we look at strategic planning and policy development. You know, that's fundamentally important, but they link closely to financial planning. You have to clearly link it in that, and then to be able to implement them, you have to have effective resources and manage those human resources effectively, and you have to have a well-equipped and professional civil service and public service to deliver that. And then, obviously, from the citizen's perspective, service delivery is fundamentally important. So, I see, you know, and then even in accountability, financial reporting, performance reporting, it's all linked together. You know, you have to look at it from a whole system perspective. But the reality is, you cannot address everything at once. That's impossible, and you know, it's often a medium to longer term perspective that you have to take in terms of these reforms. You know, so I think what's more important is looking at the phasing and looking at quick wins and what you can achieve and making sure that's well planned out. So I think that's the fundamental. I don't think you can really. I think one of the first steps would be obviously prioritization across all the areas to see what's the key areas that you need to address. And you know, we often focus on the legislation to start with. While the legislation is important, if we come to it in terms of what we're looking for, we're actually looking for implementation, not just the legislative framework being in place. And implementation is fundamentally important. And if we talk about it a bit later, the new principles of public administration have an increased focus on ensuring implementation. Okay, sorry, so I won't go any further on that.
Thank you.
I'll shut up then, will I? Okay.
Thank you.
That's me told.
Thanks. Thank you, Alistair. Just to quickly sort of reflect, I also sort of think that, yes, public administration is important for the EU accession, but I think sort of us Georgians and I guess everybody, we have to understand that it's important for us actually to be happy citizens and receiving the goods and services we want from the government. So before anything else, it's important for our country. And of course, we would love to be members of the EU and we have to do it for the EU accession. But let's just not forget just how important it is for us without being integrated anywhere. Just for us Georgians, just in the country, for us to have a good quality and sort of a relatively happy life. So my second question sort of logically flows to the EU delegation. Ms. Maria Stogova, welcome to Georgia. I know she's relatively newcomer to our country. Hopefully you'll like it here. But I have a question that actually sort of really reflects on the achievements of the government and I guess the shortcomings as well throughout this period of implementation of the public administration reform launched back in 2015. In your opinion, how do you view the progress that the government has achieved? What are the shortcomings and what do you think will be critical for the government of Georgia to really implement and deliver for us to be able to move to the next stage of the EU accession, which I hope will happen soon?
Thank you, Anna. So let me first welcome everyone on behalf of the EU delegation. So yes, a newcomer, but I was very happy to be invited and take part in this panel and to see my Ukrainian friends working on anti-corruption, because yes, previously I worked 8 years in Ukraine on basically setting this anti-corruption infrastructure. So coming back to your question, Anna, I have to be very clear and I have to flag it very clearly that I joined this Me Too movement. I'm also a civil servant, and there are issues that I can talk about and there are issues that I cannot talk about. Of course, the movement to the next stage of EU integration is something outside the scope of my responsibility, because as you know, this decision is to be taken by 27 EU member states. We as representatives of European Commission, of course, do the preparatory work. So we are technocrats, we are basically working on preparing all the reports and documents which will help and guide this movement, and I can talk, of course, about this part of our work. So, as you know, yes, I arrived in the historical moment for Georgia. Georgia received the candidate status, and I would like, of course, to congratulate all Georgians, and so I know that there were big celebrations here. But as Nicholas Sandrovich said, this is not the end, this is the beginning. You know, there is a morning after. We have to start working now. From our perspective, our work is guided by several kind of policy documents. You know that there are currently there are 9 steps that Georgia has to complete, and we will be following up this kind of progress. This will be done in close coordination and involvement of all relevant stakeholders, be it the government, of course, the civil society, our international partners. So this will be a kind of common assessment and how Georgia is progressing. First at these 9 steps. If you look at these 9 steps, you will notice that most of it is pretty much related to good governance. I would say they're quite difficult to be implemented. It involves a lot of kind of coordination and political will and certain work. We are here, of course, to help and to do whatever we can do to help Georgia to move forward. But yes, once you realize that how closely they are related to good governance, of course they are related. So starting from anti-corruption points, independent judiciary, independent institutions, be it election commission or state audit office, national bank. So this is closely related to good governance. So we will be looking at that. So the second part which we are doing and which is actually new to European Union work here in Georgia is the yearly assessment of 33 chapters of the EU acquis. And I would say we should not forget about this part of the work, which is more fundamental, more kind of detailed and going into several kind of sectoral policies. And public administration reform is one of the fundamental ones. So this has been told by Alistair in his previous speech. So, and I do confirm that public administration reform is kind of part of fundamentals, because this is the basis of the government, how it operates, how everything works, how the whole machinery works. So in this regard, it is easier for me to speak because the previous assessment was done last year and it is publicly available, so you all can have access to it and read what exactly is our assessment. So in 2 words, I can summarize that. We said that Georgia is moderately prepared in the public administration reform. I would say it's a kind of good assessment. It's a good mark in a way. But of course, nothing is perfect. None of the EU member states is perfect, so we have to say that. neither Georgia is perfect. So there are always room for improvement, and these practical steps which needs to be done are clearly enumerated in this country report. I mean, just to name few, we can talk about the entities, legal entities of the public law. So our analysis showed that there actually room for improvements in terms of the quantity and how they are operating. So certain entities, they do have executive kind of function, but they do not fit within the civil service law, so they are not considered to be that. So I think there is a kind of possibility to look at this this topic and to work on it. So we also said that there is a room for improvement in terms of the strategies for further digitalization. So this is a topic which is close to my heart because I'm coming from Estonia, and you know, I'm proud to say that Estonia is pretty advanced in this field, and I believe that this is a key issue which can help to improve the good governance area. So we also looked at the institutional setup, and we believe that the agencies which are in charge of public administration reform and working with the ministry, they could be strengthened, their mandate could be strengthened in order to make this kind of reform more standard, more kind of less fragmented. So let's put it like that. So basically, this kind of, possibilities for improvement. Also, one interesting thing which I noticed that the issue of oversight. So you have public defender functions, and you have state audit commission, and if you analyze the statistics, you see that less than half of recommendations of the public defender was actually taken in account, and it was kind of, I would say this is pretty low numbers. Previously, I worked in Turkey, and actually, when I started, they were at around 40% of recommendations were fulfilled. And at the end of my work, after, let's say, 6 years, this number was already 80%, which is more or less average numbers in European Union member states. So I will not go into much details because I think other speakers have to take the floor as well. I strongly encourage you to look at this report, because I think this is important that our partners, they know what exactly we analyze and which kind of conclusions we made, that civil society is kind of also aware that which are the topics which are important for us to follow up on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think we'll come back to the civil society part in sort of the second round of the question, but I'd like to take you a little bit away from Georgia now and speak to Jabba, who is joining us on the conference call somewhere from Europe as well. Jabba is a UNDP advisor on policy planning, as I mentioned earlier. Jabba, I know that you are currently working on the research that explores the experience of the countries who have undergone the accession talks, or who have actually more or less completed this stage. I mean, some of the Eastern European countries, as well as Western Balkans, and I think Europe is sort of trying to sort of see if there are any trends and similarities in terms of public administration reforms, how this process went in these countries, and if there are any emerging trends and similarities that you see in the process that potentially could be interesting for us who are sort of still have to go that process through, for us actually to sort of follow and to be aware of. It also sort of looks at the areas, as I mentioned, what are the key aspects of the part that absolutely has to be there with a full readiness to be able to be part of the European Union. And I think this part actually doesn't end when you join the EU. I think that continues that process of reforming the administration throughout, even after you become a member state, just to make sure that you keep up with all the reforms and sort of new approaches that the EU as a whole is introducing on a regular basis. Thank you. I think start with that.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, not here. We were, of course, really hoping that the UN session a real intention possibility. Now it is there, and one of the kind of support functions that I have was to look at the implementation context, and therefore also to look at some of the adaptations that the members that have acceded recently or that are in the accession process have made. So let me run quickly through a kind of a synthesis of the adaptations that I have observed from the literature, and partially from my experience, because I worked for 10 years in the Balkans, and I've been there when the stabilization and association process was starting there. So one of the first things that was done almost everywhere is to strengthen the core of government function, to core central elements of the government that are coordinating the accession process. In many countries, this went through creation of a separate office led by a minister, either within the foreign ministry, which were rebranded as the Foreign and European Integration Ministries, or through a separate ministerial level agency that was overseeing that process. This is something that we still do not have in Georgia, and we used to have the state minister's office that was tasked with the European integration, but currently this is technically subsumed under the foreign ministry when it comes to multilateral relations, and when it comes to the public administration reform, this is obviously under the administration of the government. The centralization is something that runs through as a red thread in all of the countries that have acceded or are now trying to accede to the European Union. And first of all, this is a centralization in legislation, because there needs to be an adoption of the acquis, but on the other hand, also a centralization in terms of how the funds are managed. And the absorption capability, especially in the early waves of the EU accession, when the EU spoke about absorption capability, they meant quite literally absorption of funds that were coming to the candidate states, but readiness of the civil service to handle the structural funds in a transparent and effective fashion. And that is something that requires very often growth in size and capacity and competency of the government services that are dealing with it. I know, Anna, you know very well how small that service is in Georgia's public administration, and that probably is one of the things that needs to be done to make it bigger and more ready in terms of capacity of its staff members to manage this transformation. The third thing is about decentralization and regional policy. The cohesion policies of the EU are extremely important, and for that it is important to manage forms in a centralized manner, but also responding to the varying degrees of economic development in the regions. And that's something that our decentralization strategy is focused on in Georgia right now. But I know that this is still a way off from the kind of
preparedness on the regional level that the EU would expect. My colleagues already spoken about and kind of approach adaptations in terms of new public management. Georgia has done some of that work early on in the early 2000s, especially in terms of service delivery. This is something that we need to continue doing because there have been some worrying for me slowdown in that process that IDFI particularly has been accenting as well, but I would not dwell on that. And finally, it is about transparency and the participatory process. Transparency financially in terms of development of the auditing and oversight services, but also in the way that the citizens have the possibility to take part in the strategic development processes and shaping of the policies, etc. Now, on the one hand, we have in Georgia their progress because there have been new regulations adopted that make obligatory for the government to make consultation with civil society actors and with public. On the other hand, these need to be implemented in practice, and there are still a lot of things to be done there. And just to conclude, I would say in terms of lessons learned from the other countries, I can name the few. First of all, especially in the Western Balkan countries, which are probably closer to us and chronologically right now in terms of membership, there is this general concern that there are some reforms, there is new legislation and regulations adopted. Formally, the approximation with the EU principles is there, but in practice, in terms of implementation, there is a wider gap. So there is probably breadth, but not sufficient depth of the reforms, and I think this is something that we should keep in mind when evaluating Georgia's progress on public administration. The second and very important lesson for Georgia is that in many countries, the stability of those reforms depended on on how realistic the EU perspective was. When the EU was kind of drawing farther, there was a fatigue towards the accession process. These reforms were slowing down and even in some cases reversing. And this is a concern that we all have also in Georgia's case. I think I will stop there. I'll just want to kind of bring my personal experience because in our program, I'm also doing the implementation context analysis that is kind of placing the public administration reform in the context of general reforms in Georgia. And I think what I would like to say to other panelists is that it would be a mistake to look at the public administration reform in isolation from everything else that is happening in terms of administration and good governance. Yes, public finance management is crucial, and Georgia has done lots of very positive things in this direction. But unless we have a governance system that is compatible with the European principles of public administration, with the fundamentals of the EU reform, the isolated public finance management system that works well is not going to make Georgia more ready to become the EU member state. Similarly, the areas that are not immediately related to public administration reform, such as the more openness and participatory approach of the government, these are also crucial. For example, I was doing a small research to adapt our program's work, and it's still quite concerning that the agenda of the government's meeting is not published in full, and neither are the results of the cabinet meetings. I mean, this is not something that is acceptable for the country that wants to govern itself based on democratic principles. So sometimes these little elements need to come together to create the whole picture, and I'm grateful for this opportunity and for the people that are present at this 2 days of meetings that they're trying to bring these little components together for the public administration in Georgia to work as it should as a member of the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insights. I think we'll come back with more questions on the experience of the Western Balkan countries, but I actually sort of following up with the Western Balkans, I wanted to ask a question to our panelists from Serbia, Miloš, who, as I've mentioned, is program manager at the Research European Policy Center. Now, Serbia actually received candidacy back in 2012, and then the following week you managed to start the accession talks with the European Union. You are now in the process of discussing different chapters, and 22 out of 35 are open, 2 of them are closed successfully. That means that European Union at least assumed that the degree of preparedness of your public administration is up to the level where they can start and move on to the next stage. I have sort of reviewed some of the reviews done for the public administration for Serbia, and I can say that it's assessed more or less positively. So you have positive developments moving forward in terms of improving transparency, service delivery, and on and on. And I would like to sort of ask you to share your experience and advices for the countries that were slightly behind you, I guess, in this process. What will be your advices, actually? What are the areas we should focus? What is the civil society's role in this whole chapter discussion and sort of negotiation process, and how has been the process up until then, so that actually we can see the clear picture of where the strengths and the role of the government lies, and then how civil society also contributes to that process of having a discussion in place and really achieving a full integration. Thank you.
Okay, it's better now. Firstly, thank you for the to the IFDI for the invitation. So really, I'm amazed, just hearing the conversation this morning, how similar conversation looks like when we are having it at home. And I think there are a lot of things that we do not know about each other, but there are definitely similarities, and maybe things that we do differently. But still, having these conversations is, I think, extremely important. And unfortunately, I do not know much about the region. It's only my second time here, first time in Georgia, but I'm hoping that we will have additional conversation together in the future. Now, Serbia, it's interesting. So there was mentioning that according to the latest reports, Georgia was moderately prepared for the public administration reform. Now, let's put that into context with Serbia. So as you said, it's been over a decade since we became a candidate country. It's been over a decade since we commenced accession negotiations. If you look at the reports of the Commission for the previous year and the year before, it says Serbia is moderately prepared for public administration reform. It also reads that there is a limited progress. Now, I was always kind of, put aback with this diplomatic conversation or terminology of the Commission. I understand it because there is a politics behind it, of course. But limited progress sounds to me like can you be semi-smart? Or you're intellectual, but you're limited. So I understand that they want to say there are steps taken, but maybe some key priorities are not done. This is why you have limited progress. So we are progressing limitedly, if there is such a word, and we are moderately prepared for a lifetime. Someone mentioned fatigue. Yes, there is a fatigue, and you are totally right. People start asking questions. So what is this all about? So I'm strongly, this is not, I am critical in nature, but this is just to say that there will be problems, and this is also to encourage you to start, head on to focus on the problems in Georgia or in the region, because it can last for different reasons. Now speaking, this is not to say that everything is wrong. And Alistair rightfully mentioned, you cannot do everything at once. It has to be sequenced. There are phases, but again, you have to take into account the entire picture, also mentioning holistic approach in this morning. So there are a lot of references that I will be making to this morning because they're true. Anyway, for Serbia, I would say that the key is, so there are successes, right? Key success factor is actually external push, believe it or not. We spoke at length about why do we need public administration reform. It's true, we need it for the accession, and not only for the accession, even after the accession. If you want to become a member state that can actually use cohesion and development funds, it will be net winner as a EU member state, not net loser from your budget. You have to have a capacity, absorption capacity, call it what you will. And of course for the domestic needs, for efficient, transparent administration, better services to make your daily life better. But in all honesty, I can safely say that without the EU conditionality, EU push and demand, I'm not sure if public administration reform will be approached as comprehensively as it is approached now, or if we will have this kind of strategic approach, right? So we would be I guess, targeting bits and pieces, like maybe public procurement or something within the PFM or something in the civil service. But this is the, and there are other donors, of course, development partners, UNDP, Swiss Corporation, German Corporation, etc., 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 who are all contributing to this story, providing funds, importantly, for public administration reform initiatives, and also give additional push. But I think it's important for your region and the recent candidate countries in Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine, is that you have already been through the grind of the process such as Sigma assessment, or I guess it was done voluntarily before. I'm not, no?
We are yet to do.
Not this time, huh? Not today. Okay, but before, I know that the baseline assessment for Georgia was in 2018, right? Just in policy. Okay, it doesn't really matter, but kind of there is a feeling about what this means. And also there were, as you mentioned, there were some reforms already undertaken in your countries. I remember that the service delivery reform, which was implemented in Georgia through the one-stop shops, was widely regarded as a good practice example, even in the conversations in the Western Balkans. Where civil servants and politicians from the Western Balkan countries were present. So this is, I think, a good, let's call it starting point. Okay. Now, when it comes to lessons learned, I would want to be frank with you here. So one thing is that without the political attention to the public administration reform, you cannot go far away. You can have, of course, success, but this will be of short breath and short-sighted, I think. In the example of Serbia, so we've been also praised in the service delivery domain. Everybody has recognized it. So Sigma and the OECD. However, it was a government priority. Going digital was government priority, and it affected service delivery. And as a result, we have implemented several enablers of service delivery. Many things are now electronic or digital, call it what you will. On the other hand, when it comes to civil service reform, I think it was never fully prioritized, but rather on a more technical or tactical level. And this politicization of top civil service management is a never-ending story. Everybody knows about it. Everyone speaks about it. There is a legislation. The mechanism of politicizing senior civil service is actually breaching your own law. It's transparent, but it's not a priority of the Commission. I will get back to my second point at the moment. So without really, but at the end of the day, public administration reform is a never-ending story. It's a dynamic process, easily affected by external factors, whether COVID, whether migration crisis. So it has to be approached that way. And this is why I go back to the beginning of the first point. It has to have a constant active political agenda. Second lesson learned is administrative reform alone cannot contribute significantly to the accession process results, if you will. And I think the gentleman from the UNDP mentioned that. Again, example from Serbia, because I will be making reference to Serbia mostly here, because I guess it's the most interesting thing for the panel. So, at the moment, public administration reform is least of our worry in Serbia. So, speaking about the negotiation chapters, there is a chapter 31, foreign, security, defense policy. In Serbian case, there is a chapter 35, which is other issues, which is in our case, to normalize relations with Kosovo. And at this very moment, as we speak, European Parliament is putting in motion a resolution on potential investigation on the elections in Serbia. Should I repeat that? So a country who's been 10 years in the accession process is potentially having an international investigation underpinned by the EU, which can potentially result in reduction of the IPA funds for Serbia. So now we are on the field of functioning of democratic institution and political criteria in more general. So, and these issues, and by the way, speaking of the chapter 31, everyone knows that our political elite is hesitant or are willing or stubborn to join the sanctions against the aggression of the Russian Federation, and so on. So these issues will determine our future when it comes to joining the EU at this very moment. Whether or not this will change, it probably will, because life changes and we have new situation every year, basically. This is not to say that the public administration reform is unimportant. It is. It's part of the fundamental cluster for a reason. We spoke about what this means for national context and for the EU context. So this is my second point, if you will, and lesson learned, because it's a huge lesson. And finally, active civil society can actually make a contribution to the public administration reforms. We've been investing a lot in that with the support, of course, of the EU and other development partners. Having a monitoring framework, having conversation platforms at the regional Western Balkan level and national level. Of course, for this, you need capacity building, you need building infrastructure, you need funding, of course. But what this brings to the table is trying to kind of go away a bit from this constant story of external demand, external push. When you have interested civil society and citizens in your own country, you will have internal demand, you will have internal push that will go hand in hand with the external one. And maybe once we become a member of the EU, hopefully, this demand will still be active. Because we know that once the accession treaty is signed and you become a member, it happens more often than not that some countries backslide in one way or another.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think that was very interesting. Now to say another country actually that we would like to hear about is Moldova. First of all, congratulations on giving green light to actually start accession talks with the European Union. Really happy for you guys. And I think in your case, Adrian, we would like to understand what's the difference between these two processes. So there was a PAR process and all of the reform delivery before you've got the candidacy, and now that actually you are really on the way of becoming EU member, well, maybe a decade later, as Miller said, but still, I think that the journey is there and you have the map, basically. How does that actually change the reform agenda, if it does at all? What are the new priorities of the public administration, if that has changed, and generally, sort of what's the process now in terms of communication and coordinating with the EU, and sort of what is this process entailing?
Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation. Well, actually, speaking about Serbia, it's a little bit difficult, and to be also on optimistic note, actually considering your intervention, probably 10, 12 years ago, you also have been congratulated, and you are still there. Actually, I really hope that we will have a different story in 10 years and to be together in EU, because this is our purpose and this is our objective, even challenging one. And it is challenging. All the times are challenging, as you mentioned. Coming back to Anna's question related to what was before and what is now, what kind of priorities we have. Actually, probably here very briefly, I will raise strategic approach. Actually, in the last 10 years, we have two strategies on par, more or less with the same areas of interventions, like strong central institutions, like strong and good strategic planning approach, public finance management. Even in the last strategy, it was decided to split on public finance management, to have a separate policy document in this area. Also, public service delivery. And actually, speaking about some progress, before or based on previous strategy, probably the main aspects or the main progress that we had, I mean, until getting this negotiation accession status, actually was first of all, adopting clear normative framework. We revised the law on government, we revised the connected legal norms, and actually we did public administration reform, trying as much as possible to align it to Sigma principles, to have a clear split between elaboration, implementation, and control. I would say that we have a good progress. This also was considered by Sigma. There is still needs some improvement, but there is some progress. Also, based on previous public administration reform, we have revised also the government structure. We have optimized the number of the civil servants at the level of the government. Mainly, it was based on the fact that we cut all the competences of implementation public policies from the line ministries, because it was a mix until that reform. Now, at least, we are trying not to have implementation policies of or implementation competencies of the level of the ministers. Also, a huge challenge in Moldova, and probably it was raised by previous speakers, it's about strategic planning and in general what we are doing with public policy documents. We are champions on generating policy documents. We have limited finances, but a lot of policy documents. And if you are speaking in figures and in numbers, probably 4 or 5 years ago, we had around 200 public policy documents, which is really crazy for a country like Moldova without any resources. Now, one of the change or one of the aspects that was implemented during previous part was revising practically totally revision of the public strategic planning approach. Now the number of the public policy documents are reduced, but I wouldn't say that everything is perfect because the number are reduced, but still there is a lack of correlation between public policies and financial resources because we have strategies, programs, but lack of financial resources or lack of correlation between them. I wouldn't say lack of financial resources. The worst progress, and it's still the worst progress, and even it was mentioned in both documents, it's about local public administration reform. We don't have any progress on local public administration reform. Yes, previous year or 1 year ago, it was adopted on such called, I would call it half a measure, even less than a half. It's law on voluntary amalgamation, but without any deadlines for voluntary amalgamation, we don't have any cases yet. Which is, from my point of view, it still remains a huge challenge, local public administration reform. I don't know how familiar are you with Moldovan local public administration system, but actually for a country like, well, I don't, with less than 3 million people, we have around 900 municipalities, being one of the most fragmented country. And when we are speaking about EU accession, we understand that we need capacity not only at the central level, but we also need capacity at local level. Now coming to current situation or what is happening now, actually the new public administration reform strategy, it was strongly linked with the candidate status of Moldova. It was adopted in this time period between candidate status and the starting accession negotiation process or and actually our strategy was at maximum level adjusted, aligned to the commitments of joining EU, or also trying to strengthen the capacity of public authorities, especially at central level. Probably one of the most relevant aspects that I know, as I know, it's a challenging also in countries in our region. It is related to salary system. Because we would like to deliver everything, but in the same time having quite low salary in public administration on one of the most important aspects that at least finally politicians understood that the people should be paid if you want the results from them, and actually we have, I would say, quite better salary system in public administration at central level. We, in the new strategy or in the new process of EU accession, revised again the structure of the, or the configuration of the government. And especially here I would highlight the last decisions are the most recent one. Even this week it was appointed. For the first time we have in the government position of a deputy prime minister on European integration. Which will play also the role of a chief negotiator in relation with EU. Actually, in an additional aspect related to public administration reform in relation with EU, it is increasing, I would say, the role of the European integration coordination process. Because until now, this role of European integration was played by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who was Minister of Foreign Affairs and European integration. Now, we revised the structure of the government in order to have only the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but the role of European integration to increase a little bit, it was increased at the level of the government, let's call it the State Chancellor, having a directly responsible bureau for European integration. Yes, we don't have yet people there, but actually we created at least on paper, and I'm really optimistic that we will have qualified people in this bureau who will coordinate. Actually, one important aspect, and here probably it's from my point of view is the most challenging one, we have tried a little bit also to revise the structure of the line ministries in order to accelerate the European integration process. But, and I'll be very frank with you here, I have the impression sometimes that we don't understand what it means European integration. Actually, one of my main messages to our colleagues from the government, being in the civil society now, actually is that European integration is not a foreign policy, it's an internal policy, and it's in policy of the government. That's why to have a clear split, here is European integration, after that it's internal policy, from my point of view, it doesn't work. Even sometimes this is the impression that we are doing something, another policy. And this is the main so-called reform in the Line Ministry, like introducing a new position of under the Secretary General of the Line Ministry, a civil servant, a top-level civil servant, a Deputy Secretary General of the Line Ministry responsible for European integration. Also, we have reorganized one department who was responsible for policy coordination. Now it is called Policy Coordination and European Integration Process Coordination. But we didn't do any changes in line in other departments. Now, having such called people who are responsible for European integration, but or at least who are coordinating European integration, but without clear split in the Line Ministry, who is doing and what is doing, it's a huge challenge. Yes, it's a lessons learned. We have seen Balkan models, we have seen Baltic models, we see different models, but it's still, I would call it still a challenge, and we have to see how to organize all these people who are there. And the departments and the competencies that they have. About coordination platforms, until 1 year ago, not now, we had this European integration coordination only in the government at the level of the Prime Minister. It was such called European Integration Coordination Committee. Now we have such called another one which is at higher level. It's called at highest possible level. It's under the president of a country. It is called National Commission for European Integration, and here it's another challenge. It's good that we have such highest possible political level and of European integration, but in the same time, what we raise, it's about having clear split of competences between such called highest political level and lower political level, and after that technical level, because we have working groups and who are at lower level. And probably I will jump to the last part related to challenges and the priorities. And from my point of view, the main priorities are strongly linked with challenges. It is, first of all, especially considering this EU accession process, we still are facing a lack of skilled human resources, not human resources, but skilled human resources. And we had this lack, especially in the process of negotiation, process. It's much more challenging, and we need these skilled people, and it remains a huge challenge which we have to face, and it should be a top priority for the government to solve it. I have already mentioned about all these coordination mechanisms, split of competences between different people, different departments. We have to see how to solve it in a way to be as efficient as possible. Another challenge, and I understand the argument of my colleague, or at least the arguments related to public administration reform and PAR never ends. Yes, I would agree it never ends, but at one moment at least it should have some breaks. Because actually in the last 4 or 5 years we have had probably each half a year we have some changes in the government. And if you are speaking about sustainability, at least for these people it is important, these people who are working them, it's important for them at least to understand their tasks until they are again reformed. It's crucially important to do it in a systematic approach, but with a clear vision. And again, the correlation between public policies and financial resources are crucially important. Probably we can, if it is needed, I'll try to more answers and we can continue during the coffee break, but thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much for a very comprehensive view. Just to quickly reflect on what you said, I guess actually it's really sort of depends on lots of other factors, how progressive your integration is. In Georgia, we have adapted the decentralization strategy. Actually, we have another sister program, USAID Local Governance Program, who supports the government at the local level to deal with the public administration reform. Of course, there's a disparity between the central and the local level, but then the other program is working to bring them closer to the central one. And even though we have adapted some of the challenges that you have just mentioned in Georgia, such as the new law on civil service and remuneration, which is always connected to the financial stuff, increasing the budget for civil servants and on. Still, there are lots of other things that are remaining as a challenge, and I guess is on the sort of stopping us from progressing the journey further. Now, actually, sort of going back to Alistair, because I know that Sigma is working on the new monitoring frameworks, which is going to be an important tool for countries like us that will be actually evaluating our public administration reform based on the selection of criteria. I guess it's a good thing in a way because we will know exactly what will be the success indicators and where should we look for. But at the same time, I think it will represent a challenge for the governments to make sure that they have really clear vision how to develop and progress in each and every one of these directions that the SIGMA will be looking at to identify just how progressive their public administration reform is. If you could just tell us before that, and I know that Western Balkans, I guess, if I can say that in advance, will be the first one to test the monitoring framework coming up this summer.
Okay, yes, well, before we get to the monitoring framework, I probably should say that the principles of public administration have been revised and they're here, my Bible.
Actually, how are they different from the previous principles? So if we are talking about the new ones, just tell us,
right,
because I know that the local dimension has been added to it. So.
Well, they're an evolution. They're not revolution, it's evolution. They're structured and formatted in a slightly different way. We've reduced the number of principles, but we've combined, well, like for example, in public financial management, we had 16, we now have 9. But all the material that was there before has been combined and drilled down. So they've been simplified, reformatted, rationalized. But they reflect, because the original principles were issued in 2014. So the world has changed since 2014. EU policies and international standards have developed. So they reflect changes in the standards and expectations. We've tried to make them a little less prescriptive and a bit more values-based. And trying to focus more on results and implementation and not so much on legislation, regulation, and guidance and things like that. They're still there. Obviously, they're a fundamental element, but it's more about at least 50% has to be about, and each principle has to be about implementation of the practices. And hopefully they're a bit easier to understand. But they also include some emerging topics like digitalization, sustainability, innovation, things like that. So when I talk about digitalization, I'm not talking about it for digitalization's sake. It's more about how access to services, how it supports better decision making, things like that. So from that perspective, and if I look at my own area, like public financial management, we've included a few things that weren't there before, like we're actually looking at tax revenue collection, things like that. We have areas where people thought we could have an increased emphasis, like capital investment and the management of fiscal risks, which were there before, but we expanded slightly. So I would say they're an evolution of, and more, in 10 years' time, things will have changed again, and we'll have to evolve them slightly then. And that's it. So in terms of the principles, they're there, and they're on our website in English and Georgian and every other language of the countries that we work with. So they're there in Serbian and Romanian, Moldovan. So. But in terms of the measurement framework, well, we have the measurement framework, which will be publicized once it's finalized. It will be used for the first time on the new principles in the Western Balkan assessments, which we're starting right now in all 6 countries that we're working with. This provides a clear assessment against the 6 areas of the principles, helps to provide the countries with information to develop their strategic reform agendas in the overall strategic PAR reform planning and individual plans like PFM strategies and areas like that. And I'm sure the recent assessment in Moldova helped them with their current strategy and the PFM strategy they just developed. And then they're used to inform the European Commission's progress reports on public administration reform. And the hope is that we'll do an assessment, a full assessment in Georgia. Sorry, Moldova was the last assessment I did. It was recently last year. So, but hopefully we'll do after we've finished the ones in Western Balkans. We'll do the assessment in Georgia. Hopefully that's the plan. We did do an assessment of just the policy development and coordination area back in 2018. So if we do manage to do that, then we'll have all the candidate countries, because Georgia's the only one that hasn't been assessed, the only candidate country that hasn't been assessed so far.
Could you just tell us if the civil society will have a role to play in this assessment and how their input will be ensured in the assessment that you'll be doing, or in the framework if we just don't want to talk about the Georgia?
Well, the civil society are always involved in our assessments. So normally, there are a number of in some certain areas we explore how government engages with them in terms of, because things like stakeholder engagement are part of fundamental elements of the policy coordination principles. We engage with, for example, public procurement. We have surveys around engagement with the contracting authorities and businesses and things like that. So there is, then we tend to, part of the problem, we will meet with civil society groups, have focus groups to talk about some of the issues. Even if it's not a direct, one of the things we measure, it's to help us assess how the progress that the government is actually making in various areas. So they are involved from that perspective.
Thank you very much. I think we have about 10 minutes remaining before the panel time is up, so I think we have time for the questions. If there are any in the audience, we'll be happy to respond. Okay, that seems like... Oh, please go ahead.
Thank you for the for the session. David Maisuradze, DSRC. I would like to ask a question regarding civic engagement tools, particularly digital tools. I would like to know your opinion. How do you assess the effectiveness or the efficiency of civic engagement tools, because we all know that even in Georgia there are a number of civic engagement tools, and government, either central or local government, they create such kind of tools, and at first citizens, some of them will use these tools, then it's being forgotten, etc., or no one is using it at all. What are the, for your opinion, what are the measures? How should we assess the effectiveness of such tools, and what are the characteristics which you think are essential for effective functioning of such civic engagement tools, digital tools? Thank you.
Thank you. This is the question for, I guess, Sigma, or for the entire panel. Okay. I just can quickly respond to his question, because right now within our program we're working on this very topic, actually, sort of trying to understand the effectiveness of the digital engagement tools, and also measuring the segment, maybe sort of the category of citizens who use these tools, if they use at all, and sort of what are the factors that contribute to this engagement. Because as you rightly mentioned, we get excited because we sort of think that yes, there's a great digital platform, but then over the time when we look at the sort of usability of these platforms, it really changes depending on lots of different factors. So I think one of our activities as a project, actually that's exactly what we are trying to achieve. So I'll be sure to get you the results of the research. But I'll let the panel respond to the question.
In terms of how we measure civic engagement, we're not looking at the specific tools per se, more about the policy and how that's been implemented. So it's a bit difficult for me to really answer the question in any detail about how we don't actually specifically measure individual tools. It's more about the overall policy and then how that's been implemented. And we will talk to civil society groups and civil society organizations to understand their perspective on how the civil society, the stakeholder engagement has been taken forward more than anything else, and that reflect in our principles. So it's not the specific tools that we're measuring or digital tools from that perspective, general policy.
Thank you.
I mean, I can add a little bit from the general point of view of civic engagement. I think here we should understand that civic engagement is important, but be it a digital tool or other tools, I think this is something more of the technical issues. What is important is to increase possibilities of civic engagement. And of course, digitalization of this kind of possibilities is something that we should be looking forward. And of course, in order to be more inclusive in terms of, I mean, transmitting the demands or concerns of the different citizens into the policy making.
Yeah, just quickly to finish off on this topic, and I also sort of, since we discussed on civic engagement, I wanted to then probably later follow up with a question with my colleague from Moldova. So I was reviewing the Commission recommendations for Moldova, and one of the recommendations they have given to Moldova is to strengthen civil society engagement, public engagement in policy making. So sort of just reflecting on that, if you could later share what are the measures currently in place and how do they think to improve this? So the question was about civic engagement, public consultations, participation in general in Moldova, because one of the recommendations outlined in the EU Commission recommendation was exactly that, sort of to support and strengthen them even further. So, so there was a question in the room, I think. Sorry. Why don't I let my colleague answer the question?
I can try to answer, and if you.
Thank you.
Well, actually, because my answer will be quite short. I would say that we have a good relation with at least with current politicians. I mean, from a civil society perspective. And I would answer to your question. I was thinking how digital tools in Moldova. Well, I wouldn't say that we have perfect digital tools, but we have digital tools for civic engagement. But it doesn't matter what kind of tools you have. It depends on the political willingness to consult, to involve you, to provide you, even not digital tools, but at least to involve you in this process. And here I will answer to your question from Moldova's perspective, and probably, not probably, for sure it is strictly linked to the recommendation of the Commission. It is the fact that we have consultations, and on paper I would say that we are better than perfect. On paper, from legal perspective, we have special laws, special regulations, whatever you want, different platforms on different papers. In fact, for, I would say, 50–70% of the documents, we have perfect consultations. But sometimes we have concrete cases when politicians would prefer to avoid consultations and civic engagement. And especially such kind of situation we have on some sensible topics, which are very important also from our perspective, but they are done quite quick. And here, especially the problem in Moldova, and it is linked not to the process how it is happening in the government, but it's the process how it is happening in the parliament. Because you know, parliamentary also have their own initiatives. And for example, according to the statistics, more than 50, this year was 55, 1 year ago was 70% of the initiatives or law initiatives that are adopted are promoted, or authors are the parliamentarians, members of the parliament. And in the parliament, the consultation process is quite low. That's why a challenge in Moldova, it's especially related to the parliament. Because if you want to cut corners and to do it faster, you are going through the parliament. And this is a huge challenge that we have in Moldova, and it is crucially important to improve it. But very briefly, it depends on the political willingness of the ruling party or the ruling coalition who is in. If they want, they will do without any tools. If they don't want, you can have perfect tools, but it doesn't work.
Completely agree. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentations and your input. I'm Kati Vashagica from Euro Foundation, and we have been working in the area of civic engagement and deliberative democracy for over 25 years in different shapes and forms. And this never been easy. And with public administration reform, for me, it's all about, as one of the presenters mentioned earlier today, it's about how you serve the people and how you engage and bring them into this deliberative process. And the second is, I think in terms of European integration as well, but in terms of the local development, it's reforms and how you're moving reforms. So what we're seeing now, we see we don't see any engagement for a very long time, and we don't even see any more sharing any information. And I think Georgi knows better than anyone else, but all the civil society and the media outlets that we support, we don't even get the information from the government. So when we talk about the public administration reform, we also, yes, we want to see that strategic partners are helping the government, but we also want to see more of our strategic partners, and especially EC, helping the civil society to engage in check and balances. But what we see recently, and I will just say like recent call on civil society. So the first page is about like 9 points that how they're important, and the second page, the call is almost all about the technical assistance to the government and not the role of or delivering social services, and not the role of civil society as the monitor of the reforms, whether it's public administration. I'm not talking about the Lot 4, which is misinformation, but even there, it's more like taking assistance to the government. So this is where we want to see, because recently we don't see any of the donors helping in this. So what function this public administration reform or public administration agenda, where the USA are supporting, if we don't see and we see the trends that go back in terms of response of the government to the public, to engagement, right, to civic engagement, and in terms of reforms, again, as you very well mentioned, we don't see that any of the recommendations that are there, or very little, are taken into account. So my question is, like, I understand that this is the reality, how we're gonna, or how you usually work in other countries maybe, that given the very centralized governance, how you move forward, and how you define priorities that are more realistic. And you are more realistic to the civil society as well, what can be its role, and not, again, the first page given like, oh, we have to do and you have to deliver on this, but the second, we're not going to help you on this, right? So that's my question, again, not just to be critical, but to see how can we be more strategic in terms of like what we can achieve and how we can move forward in this very limited environment.
Thank you. I understood that.
Okay, I'll try
I'll make a comment on it.
No, I just arrived 1 month ago, but yes, yeah, I'm pretty aware of what is happening with civil society dialogue here. I think even today the absence of the government is kind of showing us where we are. You know, last 6 years I worked in Turkey. And you know, Turkey is also a candidate country for much longer than Serbia. And there, you know, when I said moderately prepared is a good mark, you have to know that in country report for Turkey, we put that there is a constant backsliding. Turkey is a country where #1 country, I think, in the world by the number of journalists who are in prison. In that sense, you have an example. You have good examples and bad examples. So far, I think we try to pass this message to the Georgian government that for us, involvement and meaningful dialogue, and I highlight this kind of word, meaningful involvement of civil society in policy making is crucial. It is crucial. Why it's crucial? Because for us, it's a kind of indication of healthy democracy. Ability to talk to civil society, to sustain this dialogue, to be open to criticism, because, you know, I know that, you know, Georgia is a very proud country, and, you know, the criticism is not well taken always, but we have to understand this is the way forward. The role that civil society is playing is very important. You know, I like this comparison of basically that civil society is the transmission belt between the demands and concerns of civil society to political spectrum. And we have to understand that lack of this dialogue means that there is a certain monopolization of this kind of understanding of what kind of reforms are needed, what is the good governance about. We need a kind of full variety of you know, different opinions. And once we have these different opinions, critical points of view, this is how I think reforms should go forward. As the European Union, of course, we do pass this message. We do, you know. But there is limitations what we can do and what we cannot do. We cannot walk the path by Georgia. This we cannot do. We do make a lot of investment into the civil society.
In terms of the check and balance and monitoring side, and not so much on giving technical assistance?
Just to quickly.
I would say we are religious about civil society. We do believe in civil society. We try to transmit with these values, but we cannot make other countries to accept what we recommend to accept. So there are certain limitations, and I understand that you understand what we can do and what we cannot. But we do support civil society, be it financially. We include civil society in all policy dialogues that we continue. Be it discussion of the 9 steps, be it discussions of the country report, be it discussion of how or where we spend our funds. In all spectrum, civil society is involved, and this is, we show by example how it should work. I mean, but yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. If you want to just end.
One thing that we try to do and do in Serbia, I'm speaking about my organization and others as well, is to try to group, join forces, and establish a critical mass on a certain topic that we deem important. So my organization leads a group on public administration reform, and we are recognized as such, as an initiative. When we knock on doors, they know, this is Weber project, so they open the door. By being loud and by being together, because 100 voices is much stronger than 1 voice, and I'm sure you know that, and it worked to an extent in Serbia. There is also a coalition called National Convention to the EU that is overseeing and participating in accession negotiations in Serbia. So every time there is a negotiating position presented in the Serbian parliament, this coalition is there. There are annual kind of gatherings with, there's a prime minister, etc. So results, okay, here and there. You know how it works in reality. But this is one approach that proved significant. And I have to say, speaking about the EU, without the EU support, which exists to civil society in Serbia and the region, Western Balkans, a lot of this wouldn't be possible. So we can speak about the tone, about the diplomatic conversations, about how reports see things in terms of setbacks, backsliding, and progress. But in Serbia, the EU support to civil society is, I would say, personally, in my opinion, is visible and actually very important.
Thank you very much. And just to quickly, sorry, Jabba, because I don't see you on the screen. My apologies. Please go ahead.
I wanted to react to this as someone who worked in Georgia civil society since at least 1996 and kind of seeing the transformation also of the role that it's playing. I think there would need to be an adaptation in terms of how Georgian civil society approaches international partners and the European Union. Recognition of the candidacy, candidate status of the country on behalf of the European Union, among other things, means also the recognition of the capacity of the government of that country to act in accordance to the principles and to in many ways, it puts the government in the driving seat of the policies and of the negotiation process. And that is a reality that needs to be reconciled with the process inside the country. Now, I completely agree with Milos that one thing that works with the European Union is working with the united voice and participating in platforms, making joint statements and going through the routine of collaborating with the government on policies rather than only being in the process of monitoring and evaluation. And this is a capacity building element in Georgia civil society that I think we will all have to go through alongside civil servants. Actually, what I would encourage the donors and partners that we've been trying also to do in our programs to have multiple venues in which civil society representatives and civil servants can learn together about the standards in public administration in particular, but also it would be good to have it in other areas of the EU accession, to have the same language with civil servants to make sure that the process is advanced really and not only on the paper.
Thank you very much. I think you partially covered what I wanted to say, but also just to quickly tell you that actually I think it's the first time that the program, actually National Governance Program, is looking at the whole entire governance ecosystem holistically. So we are not we are on purpose structured in a way that we have 3 dimensions in the program, just sort of to give you an example. And we are focusing with to support the government, yes, to support the parliament, definitely, the oversight institutions, but then there is a dedicated and equal pillar, actually, that is working to, first of all, increase the capacity of the civil society organizations, and it's a very broad spectrum of the civil society, and also, obviously, to have the different instruments in place that will enable them to effectively monitor the work of the government, but also to strengthen themselves as the actors in civil society. That includes the capacity development themselves, actually, to ensure that they have the ability to provide quality checks of the government policies, not just the watchdog function, but in terms of content. So just as an example that we actually really think that, yes, civil society is just as an equal part with the government, and they are just an equal play on the table. And that's why I think the program is structured exactly the way it is. It's the first time, actually, it hasn't been the case previously. So Annie actually is my colleague from the program, so I'll be happy to introduce it to her. Thank you. I think we have overrun the time just by a little bit. I know it's the last one, so I won't engage you anymore. I think thank you very much for my panel participants. It was very nice to get to know you, and thank you for your input and questions, and thank you, audience, to stay here until the last hour. I think now we are all free to go and relax for the evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, if I may also add a few words, I would love to speak much more about the public administration reform. To be honest, initially, this year's forum was planned to be completely focused on the public administration reform, but then we changed our mind and we expanded the topics, but it's very relevant and important, and thank you for your insight. It was extremely interesting, especially from those countries represented here, and sharing your experience and your insights about the public administration reform process. Well, actually, the government representative was invited on this panel, the head of the government administration, but we do not have the government so far. If I'm not wrong, they are voted today to have the government form. But, well, the head of the government administration refused to participate in the conference, and the other relevant civil servants also, we are not able to. So, but in case they were here, probably we'll hear more about the Georgian public administration reform process. Recently, actually, it was mentioned about the new principles from Sigma, and it's very important for Georgia. Actually, we have commented about the draft program and action plan, and I think the process itself actually will enable us to be better engaged. And well, one is how you are engaged, but the other point is whether your recommendations are taken into account. As you have mentioned it absolutely rightly, and thank you for your comments. But well, this is what it is. We are not the decision makers. We are just the contributors to the process, and we do what we do. This is our role, this is our goal, and this is what we have to do. So thanks once again. It was once again very interesting. Thanks to JABA, thanks to supporters, USAID National Governance Program, UNDP, who supported this panel as well. And I think we made it quite well.